Hello, my name is Sharon Turnbull and I'm an Organisational Development Advisor for Capital Horizons. I'd like to just share a few ideas about collaboration. This is an introduction to an article which I've written called The Essentials of Collaboration, and I guess there's a lot to say about collaboration in organisations today. But I wrote the article because I think that collaboration is probably one of the most important yet least well done elements of leadership for today's world. And I guess we all know that collaboration is important, but sometimes I think in particularly Western culture, Western individualistic culture, we find it hard to know when to collaborate and when to compete, when to be open and when to put up barriers. So the article draws on a number of different ideas from a number of different sources, and in this video I'd just like to share a few of those. I suppose, as I said, collaboration has been something that the Western world has not been great at. And in fact, I think we can learn a lot from the Eastern world in particular, but also certain African countries where collaboration has been vital for success and, in fact, for sustaining and continuing their cultures. Certainly in the East, I've learned a lot about collaboration from Japanese and South Korean managers that I've worked with, who seem to find it very much more usual and normal to collaborate both externally across organisations and in particular internally within organisations. So why does collaboration matter? Well, I suppose for me, the world is getting more volatile. I've been doing quite a lot of work looking at the concept of VUCA, which is volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, and understanding what that means for today's world. The VUCA world, I guess, is the new normal. And we're all of us as leaders constantly having to deal with more and more changeability. We're having to become more adaptable. And if we try to deal with all of the complexity of our busy organisations and lives single-handedly, then I guess we're not going to be able to succeed. So why is the VUCA world the new normal? Just a few points that have come out from my research. Changes today tend to be on a much bigger scale than they used to be, and more broad geographically. That's because the world is becoming more global, more globalized, more interconnected, and of course the digital technologies and social networks are meaning that information flows are increasingly rapid. Our access to the world via the internet means that we have access to almost unlimited data, but somehow we need to extract from that data knowledge that is important and meaningful for us as leaders and for our organisations. So pace of change does seem to be faster than ever. We've always encountered change, of course, but it's that speed of change which is facilitated by the speed of communications that we have today that seems to be increasing. Leaders report a lack of predictability. In the old days, business schools taught how to predict, really, and strategic models were based on predicting, planning and predicting. Now, with constant change, then predicting becomes less possible, but becoming adaptable becomes more important. And with adaptable behaviour, often comes the need to be more collaborative and more able to collaborate in different ways with different types of people out there. That might be suppliers and partners. It could be with even those who are and have been our competitors. there is a kind of sense that leaders say that there's such a lot of noise in the system that they're finding it very difficult to distill what's important. And again, I think the more that we are interconnected with others, the more that we're able to work out what is meaningful, and to understand and interpret the meaning of events and things that happen to us. So operating alone as a leader or an organisation these days is rarely the best way to be successful. The other thing, of course, that goes alongside the VUCA world that I've mentioned is Nicholas Taleb's idea of the black swans. Those things that are completely unpredictable, that happen, that change our world or the landscape around us in some major way. So those many people talked about the rise of the internet as a black swan, and people talked about 9/11 as changing the world for good. I don't mean for good, but I mean forever. And I suppose even the unpredictable rise of Donald Trump and his taking over of the presidency of the United States was not predicted. So another black swan. So what does that mean for how we work? And my argument would be that that means more collaboration, more adaptability, more flexibility, more ability to move and shape and change as the world around us changes. Inside the organisation, we also need to think very importantly about collaboration. In the West, we've tended to think about ourselves as individuals in the organisation, and so individual career paths and reward systems. In Asia, reward systems have often been quite team orientated and collective. So I think for organisations that are not in a naturally collaborative culture, it's very important to look to see, to understand how collaborative cultures do break down the walls and the divides that we seem to build up in many of our organisations. Henry Mintzberg talks of slabs and silos. He talks about silos being the vertical divides that we have across organisations, so that divide us because we're in a different department or function or business unit. And he urges leaders to think about how to break down the silos so that people with different skill sets, different knowledge bases and different ways of seeing the world can collaborate and bring diversity to their work. Slabs are the divides that we put in organisations that are the hierarchical divides, so that divide the senior managers or the directors from the middle managers and from the workers, the sharp end workers. And again, Mintzberg talks about how we need to think about flattening the organisation and drawing on people at all levels to collaborate, to work on issues, because those people who are further down the organisation, who are working at the sharp end, will have different kinds of knowledge from those who are sitting in the strategic functions. So breaking down the slabs and the silos, making the organisation work collaboratively as a whole, I think is seen by many today as being absolutely critical as a leadership skill and as a leadership activity. Of course, when we think about external collaboration, the question then that leaders ask is, well, with whom? And it might be a word that has become a bit cliched now, but people are talking more and more about this idea of co-opetition. So are the competitors who in some cases are direct competitors, but in other cases we could get together with to produce something which is greater than the sum of the parts, and that, I guess, would mean pooling our resources, pooling our knowledge, and working on things together, particularly where we have some skill set or some resource that the competitor doesn't have, and yet together we may well be able to offer something that's greater than the two of us. And I think increasingly in many different sectors, working collaboratively with competitors is becoming more normal than ever before. Of course, there are questions of protecting intellectual property, and so leaders do need to think about that very thoughtfully. But there are, I think, times when putting too many boundaries around us will prevent us from being as creative and innovative as we possibly could be. And then, of course, internally collaborating. That is about, I think, breaking down those slabs and silos, and also building more effective teamwork and teams, and often that's cross-functional teams. Setting up teams for specific short-term needs, but also those teams being willing to disband and reconfigure if the external landscape changes in some way. So thinking about how you get your teams to collaborate, I think, is a very important issue for leaders to consider. And in the article, I discuss some tips that came from an article by Carol Goman, and she talks about how to inspire teams to collaborate. And here's 7 tips from her. She talks about making people feel secure and appreciated, and co-creating rules of engagement, particularly where a new team is coming together. Teams members need to trust each other, so setting down the ground rules at the beginning, I think, is a great idea. If a team is coming together for a particular project, then it's very important for the leader to say why that project is important, and set clear expectations at the beginning of the project. She also talks about building trust and trustworthiness. So if you're a leader trying to build trust, then being consistent, being as candid and open as possible, and supportive as possible will build trust in you, and hopefully foster a culture and a climate of trust within the team. She also talks about telling stories to build a community and a shared identity. I think that's a great tip. The most effective leaders are often those who are able to tell stories to paint a inspiring vision and enable people to see what the potential future is. So I think people can learn from failures, but also build on successes where those stories are shared and understood together. She talks about building respect and encouraging diversity, and I think collaboration doesn't work without diversity within teams and organisations, and across organisations, in fact. So thinking about the background and experience and different mindsets and opinions of the people within the team, I think, is a very important element of building a collaborative team. Then she also talks about building opportunities for team members to interact with each other and get to know each other and build trusting relationships. And that takes time. Sometimes leaders forget that teams need time just for some sort of a bit of social time, just to talk about other things, understand where the others are coming from, what their priorities and agendas are. I think that can make so much difference. Of course, if a team is based in different parts of the globe, there are many more virtual teams these days, and so that type of leadership becomes harder. A virtual leader has to manage teams and lead teams across the globe. But interestingly, that trust building and understanding becomes even more important should your team be dispersed and not in one place. Finally, she talks about watching your body language. So collaborative leaders are not just those who talk about collaboration, but it's those who express collaboration. And so it's not just what you ask for. You might ask for everybody's input, but it's also about how you express your desire for inclusion, your eye contact, your careful listening, your attention, and so on. So I think those are all very good pointers. There are also some similar and equally important pointers that came from Patrick Lencioni's book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. So he comes from the other angle. He talks about what often doesn't work in a team and how to address that. Well worth a read if you have time. And he says the 5 key dysfunctions of a team, and this echoes those that I've just mentioned, are absence of trust, fear of conflict, lack of commitment, avoidance of accountability, and inattention to results. So I think as a leader, if you can think about how do I build trust, how do I make sure that we deal with conflict, it isn't about pushing it under the carpet and not dealing with it. It's about probably allowing it to come out and then discussing and working it through. Commitment, lack of commitment. How do I build commitment? Often it is about painting that sense of common purpose, the vision, the excitement of where we're going to go together and what the result would produce. Accountability. How do we make sure that everybody in the team feels a sense of accountability for their part of the whole? I think that's very important. I think that's often about communicating clear ground rules at the beginning, and then the appreciation for every person's part in the whole. And finally, Lencioni says inattention to results is a big problem. So leaders do need to remember that outcomes and purpose and what we're trying to achieve is clear so that results can be measured. And it's not usually these days just about a single dimension of results. Often leaders are trying to measure results at a whole range of different levels, hence why the idea of a balanced scorecard became so popular, because results can be human results, they can be financial results, they can be long-term, they can be short-term, they can be quality, that they can be quantity. So I think very important for leaders to think about what are the expected results, how to measure those, how to recognise and reward effective teamwork and effective team results. So people often say, should we compete or should we collaborate? And Ian Williams, who leads Capital Horizons, a few years ago did some very interesting research within the third sector, and he found that it's absolutely critical to do both. So we shouldn't be drawn to think that as a leader we can only compete or we can only collaborate. And that's not just the case when we look at third sector organisations. I think that's the case now in all sectors, that we have to balance as a leader competition and collaboration. And that can work both equally externally and internally, in fact. Increasingly, leadership scholars have been writing and thinking about adaptive leadership, how to become more adaptive. And one of the things that comes up over and over is, in order to be an adaptive organisation, you need organisations that can be reconfigured to meet changing needs. And I like the phrase that Joseph Bauer, who is from Harvard Business School, came up with in a paper called Building the Velcro Organisation. And he talks about Velcro organisations are those that can be pulled apart and stuck together again in different ways in order to meet the changing needs of the external marketplace or the external context. And I think it's a great metaphor, because I think too often in the past organisations have been very fixed. They've been machine-like organisations that have been very hard to change, and often with cultures that have been so deep-rooted that change has been extremely difficult. I think increasing leaders are recognising that it's vital, really, for leaders to think about that the possibility of changing and reconfiguring. And I guess we went, in terms of organisation design, we moved from hierarchies to matrix organisations which were project orientated. I think increasingly today we're moving further, and so leaders are thinking more and more about cross-unit teams, about diversity, about short-term inputs from different parts of their organisation into particular projects to deliver particular outcomes. The final topic that I discuss in the article is about building collaboration across different cultures. I think it's very important, increasingly in today's globalised world, for leaders to think about different perceptions, different ways of operating, different ways of thinking, different ways of being, different cultures, particularly understanding better our own culture, particularly where we're working with cultures from different parts of the globe. And there are many people that have made a whole career of studying this. There's a huge amount of literature, and I point to some of it, people like Gerd Hofstadter and Fons Trompenaars in the article, who I think if you're interested in this topic you can follow up with. But I think that Hofstadter suggests that it's very important to have some genuine interest as a leader in some of these, in understanding difference. And to do that, he suggests you need to have a genuine curiosity to understand the other, a sensitivity to other ways of working. That's very important, something that we can develop. We're not born with that, but we can develop. A desire to accommodate and understand difference and the way others work and to respect difference. A willingness to share humour with collaborative partners, and patience, so that when we are working with people who are different, a willingness to learn and understand and work within a partner or a collaborator's culture. So I guess there's much more to say about collaboration, but I hope that you'll read the article, that it will give you some pointers. At Capital Horizons, we've founded our culture on a collaborative culture. So we collaborate internally, but we have many, many partners, advisors, people who can help us to think, people that can help us to deliver our ideas and to turn that into action. The projects that we work on with others inside organisations, along with other organisations, we develop those projects in a very collaborative way. It's part of our ethos, and it's part of the way that we build our advisory network. And I guess therefore we're very passionate about collaboration as a leadership capability and as one of the important elements of effective leadership. So I hope you read the paper, and thank you for listening to me.